So let's have a look at how we would plan out the question, how did Hitler become Chancellor? Now, this is the start of my plan. So I've got my introduction at the top. I've then got my 4 points: Treaty of Versailles, Wall Street crash, propaganda, Jews and socialism. And then I've got the elements of each paragraph: the answer to the question sentence, the point, evidence, explanation, and the link. And at the bottom, I've got the keywords that I'm going to have to use. Now, you do not have to use this planning structure. You can have it so you've got the introduction, point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, and then the point, evidence, explanation, link going across. Or you could do it where you've got the introduction at the top and then each paragraph with the individual point, evidence, explanation in each of them. So you can structure your plan however you want to, however best works for you. But I'm just showing you the different ways and explaining why I've done the way I've done. So the first thing I'm going to do is just check my introduction. Now, we are all really good at introductions. We know that we need to kind of set the scene and the context for what we are doing. So in my introduction, I know that I'm talking about the Weimar Republic because that was what was there before Hitler became Chancellor. I need to explain who Hitler is. I need to explain who the Nazis are. And I need to mention some dates. I know that that's what has to be in that introduction. So let's have a move on to the points that I've included. Now, I've put these points in chronological order: Treaty of Versailles, Wall Street crash, propaganda, Jews and socialism as scapegoats. You do not have to use them as chronological order. You could put your points in order of significance, most important to least important. For this particular question, that doesn't matter because the question isn't which was the most important reason. It is just how did he become Chancellor? So let's have a look. Well, the first thing I've got is the Treaty of Versailles, and I've got my answer to the question sentence. Now, you'll notice I've left the point in each of these sentences blank. That's because you can use any of these sentence structures for any of the points, but you need to make sure that you have a sentence which gives the point. So the Treaty of Versailles helped Hitler become Chancellor, or the Wall Street crash helped Hitler become Chancellor, or propaganda is one way that Hitler gained power. A simple sentence that answers the question, how did Hitler become Chancellor? Hitler became Chancellor because of the Treaty of Versailles. How did Hitler become Chancellor? Hitler became Chancellor because of the Wall Street crash. Obviously, people who are hoping to push themselves forward are not going to reuse the same sentence each time. So let's have a look at the points. I'm going to start with the Treaty of Versailles. So the point that I want to get across is that the Treaty of Versailles was used by Hitler to gain power. But how? Well, I know that Germany wanted to overturn the Treaty of Versailles, and Hitler promised to do that. So that is how he used the Treaty of Versailles to gain power. So that's my point. Let's put that in there. Germans want overturn. Hitler promised. Now you can see I am not writing in full sentences. This is a plan. It is not your essay. Now let's think of what evidence. Well, if it is one of the promises he made, it must be a policy of the Nazi Party. And I know that they often showed their policies through propaganda. And I also know that the Treaty of Versailles is mentioned in his book, Mein Kampf, which is also where the Nazis got many of their policies from. Now, in my actual essay, I will not simply write evidence is Nazi policy or evidence is Nazi propaganda. You need to give specific pieces of evidence. So if you're saying it's a Nazi policy, you need to find the Nazi policy and show it as evidence in the essay. If you're saying it's a particular piece of propaganda, you need to tell me where you got that from. So if, for example, you're using one of the images that we've looked at, you need to tell me which image it is. Tell me who was the artist, where it was from. You need to be as clear as you can. And again, if you're using Mein Kampf as evidence, you need to show me where that is. What chapter is it in? What page is it in? What's the quote from it? You need to start using evidence more effectively. And then I need to do my explanation. This is the bulk of the paragraph. So I want to explain that the treaty was too harsh. And what I might do there is go into some of the elements of the treaty. I might talk about the war guilt clause. I might talk about the reparations clause. I might even talk about how the reparations clause led to hyperinflation during the early 1920s. I need to explain that the German people felt betrayed. They felt betrayed by the Treaty of Versailles, and they felt betrayed by their government for signing it. I might use the quote of them being November criminals. I might explain why they felt betrayed, talk about how they thought that they were winning the war, and all of a sudden they were forced to surrender and admit guilt. Therefore, I'm going to have to then say how this helped Hitler. Well, therefore, people turned to political parties that promised to get rid or overturn the treaty. People turned to parties, and we mean political parties, who will overturn the treaty. So that's my explanation. Then let's go to the link. Now the link is nice and simple. It's basically an answer the question sentence at the end of the paragraph. It's making sure I've answered this question. So I'm asking how Hitler became Chancellor. That Hitler promised to overturn the treaty meant people voted for him. Or that Hitler promised to overturn the treaty meant that Hitler was able to gain power. It's a really simple sentence I'm putting at the end. So let's just pop that in. That Hitler promised overturn, squishing that in, equals power. Again, I'm not writing in full sentences, this is just my plan. So let's have a look then, let's do one more together. So I'm going to do the Wall Street crash. I'm then going to let you do propaganda on your own. I'm going to let you do Jews and socialists as scapegoats on your own. Obviously, for these points, you're going to need to adapt, find the accurate evidence, and maybe edit them yourself. So Wall Street crash is another way that Hitler gains power. So how do I know this? Well, I know, my point is that people turned to extremist groups, such as the Nazis, after the Wall Street crash. So let's put that in. Turn to extremist groups, such as the Nazis. Now, in that point, I might also want to say that the Wall Street crash made people desperate and therefore turned to extremist groups. But this is just my point. My point is that the Wall Street crash made people turn to extremist groups. Now, what is my evidence for this? Well, I can look at the percentage increase of votes after 1929, which is when the Wall Street crash was. I can look at unemployment rates. I can look at, again, Nazi propaganda and policy. So that's my evidence there. If I've used propaganda and policy in the paragraph before, this time I might want to use some concrete evidence. So percentage increase, how many votes they got after the Wall Street crash. Really hard statistical evidence, so numerical evidence. Now, what is my explanation? Well, my explanation is that the Wall Street crash led to unemployment, so no jobs. People became desperate. So they wanted solutions and turned to extremist groups which promised to make things better. Simple promise. Now here I might also want to mention how the Nazis and other groups were blaming Jewish people, were blaming communists, were blaming socialists for the unemployment rates and for the Wall Street crash. So I might want to include that in there as well. But if Jews and socialists are one of your points that you're including, you might not want to, because then you'll be duplicating a paragraph. And then I need to have my link. My link is that, my link is that people turned to the Nazis because of the Wall Street crash. It's nice and simple. Now, what you have noticed is that I've got some keywords here that I have included on the slide as well. These are things that I have to make sure I've included. So I'm just going to go through now and check what I've already talked about. I've talked about the Treaty of Versailles. I've mentioned the Weimar Republic here, and I probably would in the Treaty of Versailles when talking about the November criminals. National humiliation, well, when I'm talking about war guilt, I'm definitely going to include that. Great Depression, links to the Wall Street crash. Propaganda is a paragraph on its own here, and I have mentioned it elsewhere. I'm going to leave that for now, and I haven't yet talked about Jewish people. So what I'm going to do is, as I go through my plan, I'll tick off what I've already included to ensure they are in there. Now, what you're going to be asked to do now is to make your own plan. You're more than welcome to use mine as a starting point, so use some of my points and add to them. You're welcome to completely ignore what I've done and do your own thing. You need to be ready so that next lesson you can write your full essay. Now, this essay I do expect to be at minimum a page and a half. This is going to be a full essay, so you need to make sure you've got enough information to fill that. And I am more than happy if anybody wants to take a picture of their plan and email it over. I'm happy to have a look at any of those. So that's what you're going to be expected to do now. Whichever format of a plan you choose to do is up to you. And if you choose to do it on a really big piece of paper or across a double page in your exercise book, again, that is absolutely fine.